I'm sitting here in my apartment in Austin, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I can't help but think about that Sunday dinner 6 months ago. The one that changed everything. You know those moments in life when you suddenly see yourself clearly for the first time? That was mine. To continue listening to this beautiful and special story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special shout out for you in an upcoming story. My name is Lucas Monroe, and I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a family that ran Monroe Auto Repair. Third generation, they'd always say with pride. My grandfather started it, my dad expanded it, and my older brother Josh was being groomed to take it over. Me? I was just there, the middle child who never quite fit the mold. While Josh was learning to rebuild transmissions at 12, I was teaching myself HTML in my bedroom. While he was getting praised for diagnosing engine problems, I was solving coding challenges on websites nobody in my family had ever heard of. The smell of motor oil and the sound of air wrenches were the soundtrack of my childhood, but they never felt like home to me. I remember the exact moment I knew I was different. I was 14, sitting in the shop's waiting room, watching my dad explain some repair to a customer. Josh was right there beside him, nodding along, asking the right questions, and I was invisible. Not just ignored, genuinely invisible, like I wasn't even there. That's when I made a promise to myself. I was going to build something they couldn't ignore, something that would make them see me. College was my first taste of freedom. I chose computer science at Cleveland State, close enough to visit home, far enough to breathe. My parents thought it was a phase. Dad would joke with his buddies at the shop. Lucas is playing with computers while Josh learns real work. But I wasn't playing. I was building. Every night after classes, I'd work on freelance projects, small websites for local businesses, database management for startups, mobile apps for entrepreneurs who had big dreams but small budget. I'd sit in my dorm room until 3 a.m., fueled by energy drinks and the quiet satisfaction of solving problems that actually mattered to me. My portfolio grew slowly but steadily. I wasn't making much money, but I was making progress. Each project taught me something new. Each client reference brought me closer to something bigger. I felt like I was constructing a ladder, rung by rung, that would eventually get me out of the life everyone expected me to live. The hardest part wasn't the technical challenges, it was the constant feeling that I was living a double life. At family dinners, I'd listen to Josh talk about the shop's latest expansion, about new equipment they were buying, about customers who specifically requested him. Dad would beam with pride, Mom would serve seconds, and I'd sit there pushing food around my plate, feeling like a stranger at my own table. I graduated with honors, but only Mom came to the ceremony. Dad and Josh had a big job that weekend, a transmission that couldn't wait. I walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, and felt nothing. No pride, no accomplishment, just the hollow realization that the people who were supposed to celebrate me the most hadn't even bothered to show up. 2 years out of college, I was still living in Cleveland, still taking freelance projects, still feeling stuck between the life I wanted and the life everyone expected me to have. I'd moved into a small apartment near downtown, but I might as well have been living in my childhood bedroom. The emotional distance was the same. That's when the email came. I was at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, working on a project for a local restaurant chain, when my phone buzzed. The subject line read, Strategic Software Engineer Position, West Coast Startup. I almost deleted. I got a lot of spam emails about remote positions that seemed too good to be true, but something made me open it. Maybe it was the professional tone, maybe it was the fact that they'd actually looked at my portfolio and mentioned specific projects by name. The company was called Velocity Stream, a SaaS startup in Seattle that was revolutionizing logistics software for mid-sized companies. They'd found my work through a client recommendation and were impressed with my approach to database optimization. They wanted to schedule a call. 3 weeks later, I was in their final round of interviews. 3 weeks after that, I had an offer letter in my inbox that made my hands shake as I read it. The salary was more than double what I was making freelancing. The signing bonus was more than I'd saved in 2 years. They were offering equity, full benefits, relocation assistance, and the opportunity to build something from the ground up. It wasn't just a job, it was a career, a future. A chance to prove that all those nights coding in my dorm room had been worth something. I printed out the offer letter and put it in my backpack. I was going to tell my family at Sunday dinner. Sunday dinner at the Monroe house was a ritual. Mom would cook pot roast, Dad would sit at the head of the table, and Josh would regale us with stories from the show. It was where family announcements were made, where important decisions were discussed, where I'd finally get to share the news that would change everything. I waited until dessert. My heart was pounding as I reached into my backpack and pulled out the offer letter. I'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in my head. I'd imagined their faces when they saw the salary, their pride when they realized their son was going to work for a company that was making waves in the tech world. I have some news, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I got a job offer, a really good one. Dad looked up from his apple pie, mildly interested. Josh kept eating. Mom smiled, that polite smile she always wore when she wanted to seem supportive, but didn't really understand. I slid the letter across the table to Dad. He picked it up, scanned it for maybe 10 seconds, then started laughing. Not a happy laugh. A dismissive, almost mocking laugh that made my stomach drop. "Forget that tech crap," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He slid the paper back across the table without even finishing. "Your brother needs help at the shop. Be useful." The room went silent. Mom looked down at her plate. Josh had a smug expression that I'd seen 1,000 times before. The look of someone who was used to being the golden child, who expected everyone else to orbit around his success. "Dad, this is a huge opportunity," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The salary alone is—" "I don't care about the salary," he interrupted. "Family business comes first. Josh is expanding the service department, and he needs someone reliable, someone who won't abandon family for some pipe dream." Pipe dream. That's what he called the offer that represented years of work, months of interviews, and the chance to finally build a life that was mine. I folded the letter and put it back in my backpack. I finished my pie in silence. I helped Mom clear the table like nothing had happened, and I drove home with a clarity I'd never experienced before. They didn't see me. They never had, and they never would. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the offer letter spread out on my kitchen table. The deadline to respond was in 2 days. I'd been hoping for my family's support, their excitement, their pride. Instead, I got dismissed like a child suggesting something foolish. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Sarah Chen, the recruiter who'd reached out to me about the Velocity Stream position. But I didn't call her. I called someone else. 3 months earlier, I'd had a conversation with another recruiter, Marcus Rodriguez, about a position with a logistics tech firm in Austin. At the time, I wasn't ready to leave Cleveland. I'd told him I needed to think about it, that I had family obligations to consider. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Lucas, I was just thinking about you. Are you ready to talk about that Austin position?" "What position?" I asked, though I remembered perfectly. "The strategic software engineer role with TransLogic Solutions. They're still looking for someone with your background. Database optimization, system architecture, team leadership potential. It's fully remote, but they want someone who can be based in Austin for quarterly meetings and company events." "What's the compensation package?" Marcus laughed. "Even better than what I told you 3 months ago. They've expanded the role. They want someone who can eventually lead a team, maybe even head up a new division. We're talking 6 figures, equity, full benefits, and enough autonomy to build something really special." I looked at the Velocity Stream offer letter on my table. It was a great opportunity, but Austin felt like something more. It felt like a clean slate. "Send me the details," I said. "I'll have them to you by tomorrow morning." "But Lucas, if you're serious about this, they'll want to move quickly. The tech market in Austin is competitive." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about Josh's smug expression, about Dad's dismissive laugh, about the way Mom had just looked down at her plate like she'd witnessed something embarrassing. I thought about all the Sunday dinners where I'd sat quietly while they talked about the shop, all the times I'd felt like a stranger in my own family, all the years I'd spent trying to prove myself to people who would never see me as anything more than spare part. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to Seattle. I wasn't going to stay in Cleveland. I was going to Austin, and I was going to build a life that was completely, entirely mine. The Austin offer came through the next morning, and it was everything Marcus had promised. The salary was 20% higher than Seattle, the equity package was more generous, and the role came with immediate leadership responsibilities. More importantly, it came with the chance to be part of something from the ground up. I accepted it that afternoon. I didn't tell my family. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't even tell my closest friends until everything was already in motion. I just started planning my exit from Cleveland like I was orchestrating a quiet revolution. I gave notice to my freelance clients, finished up my existing projects, and started researching neighborhoods in Austin. I found a modern apartment complex in the Domain area, put down a deposit, and scheduled a moving truck. All of this happened in the space of 2 weeks, while my family assumed I was still mulling over whether to help Josh at the shop. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, it was the secrecy. I'd never been good at hiding things from my family, even when those things were my own dreams and ambitions. But this felt different. This felt like survival. I remember packing my apartment on a Thursday night, wrapping my computer equipment in bubble wrap, boxing up books that no one in my family had ever seen me read. Each item I packed felt like a small act of rebellion, a quiet declaration that I was more than the person they'd always expected me to be. My landlord was surprised when I gave him 30 days' notice. Job opportunity, I told him, which was technically true. My neighbors were confused when they saw the moving truck. Family stuff, I said, which was also technically true, just not in the way they assumed. The morning I left Cleveland, I drove past the auto shop one last time. I could see Dad's truck in the parking lot, Josh's car next to it. They were probably inside, talking about inventory or discussing some repair job. They had no idea their son and brother was leaving town with everything he owned packed into a U-Haul. I pulled into traffic and headed south, toward a city I'd never lived in, toward a job I'd never done, toward a life I'd never imagined, but had somehow always been building toward. Austin hit me like a revelation. The energy, the creativity, the sense that anything was possible, it was everything Cleveland wasn't. I'd been living in a city that felt like it was stuck in the past, and suddenly I was in a place that was constantly reinventing itself. My apartment in the Domain was modern, minimalist, and completely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a view of downtown that made me feel like I was living in a different world. I set up my home office in the spare bedroom, arranged my books on floating shelves, and bought furniture that actually reflected my taste instead of just being whatever I could afford. TransLogic Solutions was exactly what I'd hoped for. The company was founded by two former Amazon executives who'd identified a gap in the logistics software market. They were building tools for mid-sized companies that needed enterprise-level functionality, but couldn't afford enterprise-level pricing. It was innovative, it was challenging, and it was exactly the kind of work I'd been preparing for my entire career. My first week, I was introduced to the team I'd be working with. Software engineers from Google, Facebook, and startups that had been acquired for hundreds of millions of dollars. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood the problems I wanted to solve, who saw technology as a tool for building something better. The work was intense, but fulfilling. I was designing database architectures that would handle millions of transactions, optimizing systems that would save companies thousands of hours of manual work, building tools that would scale with businesses as they grew. Every day I was learning something new, solving problems that mattered, contributing to something bigger than myself. But the best part wasn't the work, it was the autonomy. No one questioned my decisions. No one dismissed my idea. No one expected me to be anything other than exactly who I was. I started exploring Austin on weekends. The food scene, the music venues, the hiking trails around Lady Bird Lake. I went to tech meetups and entrepreneurship events. I met people who were building companies, creating art, starting nonprofits. I felt like I was finally living instead of just existing. 3 months into my Austin life, my phone started buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from my family. It started with Mom texting about Sunday dinner. "Will you be here this week? I'm making your favorite." Then Dad calling about some computer problem at the shop. "Josh said you're good with this tech stuff. Can you come take a look?" I'd been deflecting, making excuses, staying vague about my availability, but I couldn't avoid it forever. The breaking point came when Mom texted, "Josh needs help with inventory week. Can you take some time off work to give him a hand?" I was sitting in my office at TransLogic, looking out at the Austin skyline, when I got that message. I just finished a meeting where my team had presented our quarterly results to the executive team. We'd exceeded every performance metric, and I'd been specifically praised for my leadership on a system optimization project that had saved our biggest client 40% on their processing costs. I was succeeding beyond anything I'd imagined when I left Cleveland. and my family still saw me as Josh's potential assistant. I replied, "Sorry, I'm no longer in Ohio." My phone started ringing immediately. First Mom, then Dad, then Josh. I let them all go to voicemail. I wasn't ready for the conversation yet, but the messages kept coming. Confusion, anger, hurt feelings. "What do you mean you're not in Ohio? Why didn't you tell us you were moving? This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior we've come to expect from you." That last one was from Dad. It stung, but not in the way it would have 6 months earlier. It stung because it confirmed everything I'd suspected about how they saw me. I wasn't a person with dreams and ambitions. I was a disappointment who'd failed to meet their expectations. I finally called Mom back that evening. "Lucas, honey, what's going on? Josh said you moved without telling anyone." "I got a job in Austin," I said. "A really good job. I tried to tell you about it at Sunday dinner, but Dad wasn't interested." There was a long pause. "That was months ago. That was about Seattle. This is different, Bet. But why didn't you tell us? We're your family." I didn't know how to explain that I'd tried to include them, that I'd wanted their support, that their dismissal had been the final push I needed to stop asking for permission to live my own life. "I needed to do this on my own," I said finally. 6 months after moving to Austin, I was promoted to senior software engineer and given leadership of my own team. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, additional equity, and the kind of responsibility I'd been working toward my entire career. I was in charge of a 5-person team working on a new product line that would integrate artificial intelligence with traditional logistics software. It was cutting-edge work, the kind of project that would define the next decade of the industry. My team was brilliant. Software engineers from MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon. Data scientists who'd worked at Netflix and Uber. Product managers who'd helped build some of the most successful apps in the world. And they all reported to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family had been expecting me to help Josh reorganize the shop's inventory, I was leading a team that was building software used by companies with billions in revenue. The validation came from an unexpected source. I was at a conference in downtown Austin, presenting our latest product to a room full of industry leaders, when I noticed a familiar face in the audience. It was Mike Thompson, a guy who'd gone to high school with Josh and had always hung around the auto shop. After my presentation, he approached me during the networking break. "Lucas Monroe? From Cleveland?" "That's right," I said, not sure if he'd remember me. "Dude, I just watched you present to a room full of Fortune 500 executives. That was incredible." We talked for a few minutes about what I'd been working on, about the company's growth, about my role as a team leader. Mike was genuinely impressed, asking technical questions that showed he understood the complexity of what we were building. "I've got to ask," he said as we were wrapping up, "does your family know what you're doing down here?" I laughed. "They know I moved to Austin. They don't really understand the work. Man, they should be proud. What you're doing is amazing." A week later, Mike posted something on Facebook that tagged both me and a photo from the conference, with a caption that read, "Ran into Lucas Monroe at a tech conference in Austin. Dude is absolutely crushing it in the software world, leading teams, building products used by major companies. Cleveland represent." Josh commented, "Yeah, Lucas is doing his computer thing. His computer thing." Even when presented with objective evidence of my success, that's all it was to him. A year after leaving Cleveland, I was sitting in my office at TransLogic, working on a strategic plan for our next product launch, when my phone rang. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer. Our conversations since I'd moved to Austin had been brief and awkward, filled with the kind of small talk that people make when they don't really know each other anymore. "Lucas, I need to talk to you about something." "What's up?" "I ran into Mike Thompson at the hardware store yesterday. He was telling me about that conference, about your presentation. He said you're running a team now, that you're building software for big companies." I waited for him to continue. "I didn't realize, I knew you were working in computers, but I didn't understand what that meant." "Dad, I tried to tell you. I showed you the offer letter. I tried to explain what I was doing. I know, I thought it was like Josh's computer at the shop for keeping track of parts and appointments." There was a long pause. I could hear the sounds of the shop in the background, air wrenches, the hydraulic lift, the radio playing classic rock. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. I should have said that a long time ago. It was the conversation I'd wanted for years, but it came too late. The validation I'd once craved felt hollow now, like an apology for a wound that had already healed. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. But I also knew that I didn't need it anymore. I'd built a life in Austin that was entirely mine. I had a career that challenged me, a team that respected me, and a future that was limited only by my own ambition. I had friends who shared my interests, a city that felt like home, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd bet on myself and won. My family still didn't fully understand what I did for a living. They still saw me as the kid who'd chosen computers over carburetors, who'd left Cleveland for something they couldn't quite grasp. But that was okay. I'd stopped needing their approval the moment I realized I could give it to myself. Last month, I was offered a position as Chief Technology Officer at a startup that's being funded by some of the biggest names in venture capital. The salary is more than my parents' shop makes in a year. The equity package could set me up for life. I haven't told my family about the offer yet, not because I'm hiding it, but because their reaction doesn't matter to me anymore. I know what I'm worth, I know what I'm capable of, and I know that the best decision I ever made was walking away from the life they'd planned for me to build the life I'd always dreamed of. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. I let go of their expectations, their limitations, their definition of success, and in doing so, I found my own.